Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh, they don't say one without the other here. He was the father of Vietnamese nationalism, dead for 16 years. He's now everybody's uncle. They sing "Last Night I Dreamt of Uncle Ho" and touched his hair and long white beard. The song's become a children's anthem. And Ho's mausoleum, like his image, dominates Hanoi, a vast square marble and granite block where thousands are bussed in daily for their pilgrimage to Vietnam's own Marxist Mecca to see their prophet embalmed in his glass tomb. So rigid is their Marxist-Leninism, we didn't think this regime would allow worship of another kind. But on Sunday, Hanoi Cathedral is full, with as many young as old in the congregation. According to the Marxist hardliners, taking the body of Christ is tantamount to civil disobedience. They're called by the commissars the believers and the outsiders. But every week they come to take the bread and make their choice of allegiance public. Hanoi's War Museum is another place of homage, where young and old come to see the Soviet war machines that made Vietnam's victory possible, as well as the debris of the enemy's defeat. The guns that sent the Americans packing, the tank that led the final attack on Saigon 10 years ago. 30 years of war, but the children of the peace must wonder where it happened because there are so few scars left to be seen here in the capital. The grand old French buildings, the Opera House, Art Museum, embassies, they've all survived to give Hanoi a little elegance. The American bombs were, after all, meant to fall on the densely populated slums. There is only one memorial to President Nixon's bombing blitz on Christmas Day, 72, where in this one street, 1,000 people died. Hung Van Rung is 84, and he can't explain how he survived when his family were buried alive. Now he has the title caretaker of the 25th December Memorial, looking after a hole in the wall that had once been his and his children's home. But the only true memorial to the dead infused our Vietnamese guides is reconstruction. All very well if there's the money to do it with, but there isn't. Vietnam is bankrupt and in debt, and as dependent on Russia to survive the peace as it was on Russia to win its wars. It's costing the Soviet Union the equivalent of £8 million a day. Russia is Vietnam's only benefactor, therefore Russian is Vietnam's second language. Pupils are given Russian videos and tape recordings and up-to-date books, one each. Moscow's influence trickles into their young lives, however much the Vietnamese pretend it doesn't.
Good evening, Mrs. Baker. Good evening, Mrs. Brown. Here is my daughter. Her name is
Look,
Mary.
they say, we teach English too, because that's the international language, the language of the new technologies. That's right, but there's no investment here. There's not an English book in the class. At the Hanoi School of Dancing, a Russian ballet mistress and her choreographer were teaching Swan Lake, though the Tchaikovsky was barely recognizable. They wore overcoats because Soviet aid doesn't stretch to heating the classrooms. The young dancers may shiver, but there's compensation. The talented will be invited to train and dance with the Bolshoi. Soviet grants are now being given to maintain traditional Vietnamese dance groups and pay for them to tour Eastern Bloc countries. Russian aid is not simply about tanks and tractors. But Vietnam has now found independence where it had given up hope of ever achieving it, on the land. After years of disastrous crop failures compounded by as many years of state mismanagement, the farming cooperatives here in the north are showing a surplus for the first time. And simply because, making a virtue out of necessity, the government has employed that old-fashioned thing we call personal profit and what they thinly disguise and call state incentives. What it means is that as long as farmers grow enough to meet government quotas, the surplus is theirs to sell how and where they like. It's not Marxist-Leninism, but it's work to dream. The government is suddenly exporting its best grain rice for foreign exchange, and the farmers are filling the free enterprise markets for a tidy personal profit. Those who can't afford the higher free market prices rely on government rations in government stores and the coupon books that go with them. It's one of the sadder sights here, the sudden rush and hysterics when something new and cheap comes to a counter, emergency measures that people put up with in those long, lean and dangerous years of war. But it must be very hard now, still, 10 years into the peace. Michael Nicholson, ITN, Hanoi. Returning here after 10 years is like stepping in and out of a time warp. First you see a familiar Saigon, and then it suddenly changes to an unfamiliar Ho Chi Minh City. It's a tale not of one, but two cities and two countries. Famous Tudo, the GI's favorite street of 100 girly bars, has been renamed General Uprising Avenue, and now the empty bars only sell lemon soda, and the girls do no more than flirt with the camera. The American embassy under siege during the Tet Offensive in '68 and the evacuation point for the hasty American retreat in April '75 is now the headquarters of Vietnam's oil company. And children play checkers where US Marines once patrolled. In yesterday's Saigon, the streets were always crammed with cars and motorcycles, but today pedal power takes them to work in Ho Chi Minh City. The bicycle is the great leveler now, the ideological compromise between one man, three cars, one man, no shoes. It's said that the Americans corrupted and fractured Saigon, but there's little to see of America here now, except the extravagant line of wedding cars waiting for a bridegroom rich enough to pay for black market petrol. And Saigon's black market is one bit of Americana that survived as a reminder of the GI's dollar bonanza. But who buys now? Who in communist-ruled Ho Chi Minh City can afford fans and fridges, television sets and stereos at 10 times the official bank rate? But somebody must, it's flourishing. And ships from Hong Kong and Singapore still meet the smugglers at night on their way up the Mekong. Hanoi treats Saigon as an exceptional case, and Saigon likes it that way. The Saigon elite, now party chiefs and provincial government bosses, played tennis in whites on a Sunday morning at the once exclusive French Cercle Sportif. The new rulers of Ho Chi Minh City call it a workers' recreation park, but not many children have rackets equal to 3 months' wages. And why, I asked, at the still elegant swimming pool, were 100 workers watching in the 90 degrees heat when a handful of elitist beauties had it to themselves. It's a problem reporting this city of two faces, seeing the sinister where it doesn't exist and missing it where it does. Like the Roman Catholic cathedral, where people are apparently free to preach and worship whatever the ruling Marxist hardliners say, and yet I was told religious leaders tailor their sermons to suit the government, and that over 200 of them are in jail. A painful peace, some say, and yet outwardly suburbs like Cholon, Chinatown, seem relaxed. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese left when the communists took over, sailing as boat people into the South China Sea. But 10 years on, and an estimated 500,000 still remain, living and praying their own way. One of the government's few successes in the South has been to create an atmosphere of mistrust and fear. We were aware of this in the Mekong Delta, where for the first time in a month's traveling of Vietnam, we had police escorts. 6 years ago, the government tried to impose a state ownership of land, but the Delta farmers, more interested in crop yields than ideologies, simply stopped farming and sowed and harvested only enough to feed their families. As the Delta is the fertile rice bowl of the country, Vietnam almost starved. And so in a rapid turnabout, the government allowed the farmers to sell their surplus rice for their own profit as long as they met government quotas. The government called it incentive, as if they'd just discovered a new word. But for hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese here in the South, incentive is a word that's gone from their vocabulary. They are the former business people, the middle classes, who under communism have lost both their rank and livelihood. And so under the government's orderly departure program, they are allowed to leave, about 600 a week. They represent the hostile attitude, the South versus the North. They are the Saigonese who the government concedes must leave Ho Chi Minh City if the two Vietnams are ever to be one. Michael Nicholson, News at 10, Vietnam. They call them here the Cong Lai, the half-breeds. Half American, half Vietnamese, they are the children of what the American military used to call fraternization. The Vietnamese see them as something the GIs left behind. This is an orphanage close to the former American base at Ben Hoa, just outside of Saigon. Nguyen Con Duc was abandoned by his mother when he was 5. She wanted to marry a Vietnamese, but first she had to discard her black child. Some Amerasians like T can only ever hope to be wanted here. She knows nothing of her father because she never knew her mother, who abandoned her at birth when she saw her baby's color. It was a common thing to do. 15-year-old Lisa got her name because her Vietnamese mother saw it tattooed on the arm of her American lover. She's hoping to be sent to adopted parents in the United States. Every Thursday afternoon at Saigon's Ton Son Airport, hundreds of Amerasians say goodbye to Vietnam and their Vietnamese mothers, flying off to American strangers they've never seen and who've never seen them. They are the casualties of a war that's been over for 10 years now, but it's taken that long for the American and Vietnamese governments to settle their mutual recriminations and sort out each other's immigration laws. Both governments have now agreed that the number to leave is around 4,000, but it could be 5 times that if families want to go too, because some mothers, desperate to get away from the communism they hate, are using their Amerasian children as a ticket out.
Do you know where her father is?
Before I have an address, but now long time I don't have it.
You had his address, but now you think he may have moved?
Yes, a long time I don't have a letter.
So you're just going there hoping to find him?
Yes, sir.
America's a very big place.
Yes, I know that.
Madam Butterflies in search of a new life in the new world, because there's no room for their children who were born out of the American war. Outside Phnom Penh is the strangest memorial to any regime, the biggest car dump in Southeast Asia. 10 years ago, the Marxist Pol Pot and his Khmer Rouge army returned Cambodia to the Dark Ages. His new calendar began at year 0, and one of his first edicts was to ban motorcars. Buildings did not belong in reborn Cambodia. This had been a school, but he'd banned education, and anyone with learning was murdered. Pol Pot chose this place outside Phnom Penh on the edge of the Mekong River for his slaughter. It's become known as the Killing Fields. It was once a park where people came on Sunday afternoons to picnic. Now, like Belsen, it's a memorial to genocide. A new grave is found every month, but the Cambodians now appear obscenely casual and leave the bones around like litter. It is shocking, but it is deliberate, which is why 9,000 skulls are stacked in what used to be the tea pavilion. Everyone lost somebody. Nuav Chultara and his friend Nongriti have been told their mothers and their fathers were murdered here. Now they've come for the first time to walk the line. No one knows exactly how many died, but it's thought to be about 2 million, or a quarter of the population. You would have thought that by now these remains would have had a decent cremation in accordance with Khmer religion. But the Cambodians say they have no intention of doing that. They say the Khmer Rouge killers buried these people, and now the graves have been opened and the skulls have been stacked so that no one should ever forget Pol Pot and his killing fields. Kong Duan is 66 and one of the country's few surviving silversmiths. The Khmer Rouge, he said, looked at people's hands, and if they were smooth, they were mutilated. There are less than a dozen like Duan left in the country, and he says he's busily teaching apprentices before he's too old to teach. Cambodia is almost bankrupt of talent. There were over 400 doctors, now there are less than 50. and medical students must first learn French or English because books of medicine in their own language were destroyed, as were all books the madman found. But a country wedding is proof that this lovely country is finding its way back, because Pol Pot abolished marriage in his year zero. There were no husbands, no fathers, no wives, no mothers. Women bore the children of strangers on the orders of Angka, the organization. But nowadays, those who can afford to kill their pigs and spend their savings celebrating the old way. And for the old reasons. Cambodia is booming with babies. No one knows how many, but everyone's certain that within a generation, the country would have made up the millions Pol Pot killed. So much and so many are returning to normal. The piggy banks say so. Because money too was banned, but now it's back and the markets are filling up with people spending it. Little by little, the old life is trickling again into Phnom Penh. The Buddhist temples, defaced and part destroyed, are being repaired and repainted. And the monks who had their saffron robes torn off them and sent naked into the fields to work have assumed their sacred role again. But it's in the countryside where the struggle is the hardest. Cambodia is relying on a handful of Western charities like Oxfam to survive. The farmers have lost 2 seasons of rice through flood, and they are now selling next season's seed to live. Because Vietnam invaded this country to rid it of Pol Pot, the West, including Britain, has cut off both trade and aid. The Vietnamese army is training the Cambodians to protect themselves. But if the Vietnamese left, the guerrilla armies, with Pol Pot still the most powerful and still as murderous, would take the country back again. So the Cambodians are faced with the devil's alternative: live under Vietnam's tutelage and suffer the penalties, or risk another year zero under Pol Pot. Michael Nicholson, ITN, in Cambodia.